After seeing the popularity of Meet the Spy Reanimated, we knew we had to create another collaborative Gmod project. This time we went bolder. Meet the Medic Reanimated is bigger, with more Gmodders working together than before. A grand total of 29 Gmodders participated in this project, and as one of the main coordinators I'm very proud of everyone who got involved. Here we offer you a behind the scenes look at some of the entries. I hope this can provide some help or insight to you fellow aspiring animators out there. I am Awesome Noob. Please enjoy these behind the scenes. While Meet the Spy Reanimated was organised entirely within one text channel of the House of the GModders Discord server, Meet the Medic Reanimated had its own Discord server. This let us have specific spaces to keep useful add-ons and resources, as well as to outline the rules. We also give every participant their own text channel, the idea being that everyone would have their own space to show off their work and seek the opinions of others without being buried under other messages. We asked everyone to keep their work on the project a secret until the finished video was uploaded to YouTube. I recommend to anyone looking to set up a large group project that you create a Discord server or some other equivalent to keep information easy to access for everyone.
Having your audio synced to your video is important in any animation, but it's especially important in a project such as this one where we were not allowed to change or adjust the audio. I'm not a fan of guessing and checking when it comes to audio syncing, so I use a method that takes the guesswork out of the process by understanding the timing of everything before beginning to animate. Note that while this will work with stop motion helper, and potentially other programs beyond Gary's mod, it will not work with Henry's animation tool, since the strategy relies on having a timeline that is divided into frames. First, take the audio you want to animate and drop it into your editing software. Next, you'll need to determine how long each sound, phoneme, or syllable lasts by zooming in on the audio and listening to a few frames at a time. Once you've isolated the sound, write down how many frames it lasts. Do this for every single sound, phoneme, or syllable, including silence. Here is an example using a different video.
Whoa, slow down, Maurice.
Now it's time to animate. If you do stop motion, every time you take a screenshot, mark a tally next to the sounds so that you can keep track of where you are. For stop motion helper users, do the math to figure out where on your timeline each sound should be. Here's a recap. Figure out the timing of sounds by using the timeline. Write down a list of these sounds and how many frames each one lasts. For stop motion helper, write down which frame on the timeline each sound should begin on. Use this to animate your audio and you'll be in sync every single time. Here's some additional tips. Pause if you want to read them. In the last bit of my entry, I did a camera trick called a dolly zoom, which is where you have a camera moving towards or away from a subject while its field of view is adjusted to keep the subject at the same size in the frame. This is a neat trick often used in films as it can give the illusion that the world is collapsing in on the subject or that the subject is shrinking as the world around it expands. I've seen other Gmodders do this manually by moving their player model and adjusting the FOV in real time using the camera tool, but it usually appears a little bumpy and inconsistent. You could maybe smooth this out by using a lower time scale or a controller instead of a mouse, but I decided to do it frame by frame so that I could be more precise. To do this, I placed two cameras at a starting location, one for screenshots and another for reference. Each frame the camera moves forward, and I'd adjust its FOV so that Scout was roughly the same size in the screenshot camera as he was in the reference camera. That's all there is to it. Tedious, but it works. Yay. Fun fact, the Scout here is Shane Toon, the guy who made the entry after mine. This is my revenge for when he killed me in the talent show collab.
What happens now?
Now? Let's go practice medicine.
Hello, I'm Butane Boss. I originally declined to take part in Meet the Medic Reanimated, but I was more than happy to take up Minnie's allotted part after he left. But he came back after I completed my allotted part, and he has part 4B. Green Butane wants people to make behind the scenes videos, so here's mine. A few folk were asking how I did the Deus Ex scene, so here's how I did it. I took 2 models from Night Stalker's Deus Ex pack that fit the build for the Medic and the Heavy. Since the Deus Ex character textures work with almost every character model, I then made the Medic and the Heavy textures by mashing up and recoloring existing textures. I then used the invaluable Submaterial tool by Kawush64 to replace the textures. The Submaterial tool is very handy if you want to make reskins of models, but you want to keep the original model intact and can't be arsed hexing. Let's find out who this really is! Zoinks! Morgan Everett! As for the editing, I took 2 black screens in Movie Studio and used them for the letterbox. I used Deus Ex footage I recorded a while ago to get the timing right for the letterbox transition and the length of a breathing cycle. Butane. The Medic model in the Meet the Medic pack isn't an HWM model. How did you achieve these HWM flexes? Well, here's a little lesson in trickery! It's quite simple, really. I shrunk the Meet the Medic model's head down, and I animated Maxie's HWM head over it. If you look closely, you can see that I also did this to the non-HWM nude heavy model made by Max of S2D. When making the heart glow, there was this annoying thing where the camera was looking straight at the light bulb, making it glow a halo. I fixed this by spawning a panel, turning it invisible, and shoving it in front of the camera, and boof, you can't see it anymore. When I was making the decapitation scene, I found that the heavy head somehow has different shading properties to that of the full body model. I had to disguise this by adding a white light just above the head, and it works. It's not perfect. So yeah, I hope this behind the scenes helped you in some way. Thank you so much for watching. Now f*** off and let me work on X over.
Animation is a tedious medium, and it's no secret. And once you have a basic flow of animation, sometimes the temptation is to go, that's fine, print. But hold your horses. There's always ways you can improve. In my case, it was with the Medic and this ball. On its own, I'm not really sold on the movement. The ball doesn't really feel like a ball, it just feels like a solid mass that's just floating in space. So what can we do that can sell this motion with the ball more? What I used was smears and squash and stretch. Smears essentially you apply when things are moving particularly fast through a space. So once I'd taken the sequence frame by frame, I took out the frames where the ball would be moving between different positions, and then placed those frames into GIMP and just got out a handy smudge tool. If the distance between objects gets bigger between frames, then the more smear you can apply on it, and obviously when it's easing into a stop, then the less you need to apply. But I'm not quite sold on its bounciness or flexibility. It doesn't really feel like a ball because it doesn't change or deform. So what we apply here is squash and stretch. Squash and stretch in this case being used to squash the ball when gravity has a hold of it, and when momentum finally sends it up into the sky, it's being stretched away by those 2 dominant forces. And to do this, all I did was going into stop motion helper where I edited in the frames where I need to, and simply used the advanced bone tool, and created the squash and stretch like effects where necessary. So the squash would come down whenever it would hit Medic's knees or feet, and the stretch effect would come whenever it was soaring itself into the sky. So now with these techniques used together, already I'm much more sold on this movement. If you take away anything from this segment, if you see something that you could improve on or add something to enhance it more, do it. It will pay off.
And now for something completely different.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm Ginger, and I'm gonna walk you through what I did in my entry in Meet the Medic Reanimated. Please keep in mind that these methods are what I use and might not be for everyone, but hey, watch it anyway, maybe I'll learn something new. Anyway, without further ado, let's get down to it. Okay, so for pre-production there really wasn't much. I jotted down a few ideas, thought about how I would use them, and lastly typed up a brief summary of what would happen. Now with a loose idea of what would happen in the entry, I needed to think about the pacing and duration of each shot. When doing this I had to consider the sound of the original clip because the animation had to be in perfect sync with it. I planned this out by placing the original clip into Sony Vegas, adding the timecode and putting the setting to absolute frames. This way I could easily calculate how many frames each shot would take and place markers at key beats in the audio. It should also be noted that this method works best when doing post-to-pose animation, but it's still doable with other methods. Lastly, before I began animating, I had to manually mount Black Mesa for the microwave model, but instead of porting source like a normal person, I had to port the Steam version, and while the maps were messed up, luckily the microwave was still intact. Now moving on to animation, a lot of time was spent trying to find the right angle for the first shot, as I had to make things easy to mask out in post. As a result, I had to make the camera movements straightforward and linear. I also had the medic's finger go over the switch, allowing me to just vertically flip it in post instead of animating it. The rest of the animation in the first shot boils down to making things shake, so there isn't much to talk about. Although if there's one thing I could mention is that when making a loop in Stop Motion Helper, do not copy paste keyframes as it will only cause errors. Instead go between each keyframe in the loop and then record it, drag it in front of the rest of the keyframes, and this will more or less provide the same result as copying them. Now for the second shot there's a lot more movement, so for this I decided to do some video referencing, and by that I mean getting a hedge trimmer and using it as if I'm winding up a minigun. There was also a tiny spider on it, which was cute. Recording this allowed me to take out key poses when watching the clips. It also helps one get a feel for the weight and momentum of a motion. I'd recommend any animator do it, and I don't care how ridiculous it makes you look. If it makes for a better animation, just fucking do it! Also when exporting the image sequence I did the particles separately with a blue screen, just so you know. Now with animation out the way, we'll move on to editing, where all the magic happens. Now in the game, the medigun switch and meter pointer are completely static, meaning I'd have to edit them all in post. For the switch, it was a simple case of masking it out and flipping it with pan crop. The meter also involved masking and pan crop to make it move, as well as patching the motionless pointer to make sure there were two pointers at the same time. Now putting the text on the light or the microwave with 3D tracking was somewhat tricky, mainly because there was no easy way to keep track of the angle or position. To help with this, I just had to put 2 or 4 capital I's on each side of a text to make sure they lined up with the two sides. This method isn't perfect and the tracking wasn't flawless, but it was acceptable nonetheless. Now onto the shiny lights and how I made things glow. For the Uber light, I made a second layer, masked out the Uber light, and added a tad of red glow as well as a light flare. As for the microwave, I masked out the timer and the glass part of the door. I put some green glow on the timer to make it stand out a little better, and put some rays coming from the magnificent microwave casserole. I also copied the glass door layer and used the add blending option to make the microwave light up like any microwave would when being used. Okay, now next up is the Medibeam. Now the process for adding the Medibeam was a little convoluted, so I'll try my best to sum it up. When I placed in the clip and I chroma keyed the blue screen, it looked kind of off, so I rendered it with a black background. Then I placed a newly rendered clip and used the add blending option. However, the colors looked very washed out and the beam was far too transparent. So I decided to copy the layer, place it underneath the original, and then I chroma keyed the black background, and boom, the Medibeam looked normal. The bottom layer acted like the actual beam, while the top layer was a glow of sort. Hopefully that made sense. Lastly, to make the camera movement smoother, I linked overlayers together and used the parent layer pan crop. I also used Real Smart Motion Blur for, well, you know, for blur, and that should hopefully wrap things up. I hope you learned something from this. If not, then I apologize.
While the House of Gmodders is a closed community for experienced Gmodders, we know some of you out there might benefit from a public space to share Gmod work and receive help and critique. That's why we've created the Gary's Mod Animation Workshop, a Discord server to bring Gmodders together. You can find a link to join in the description of this video.